countries, both developed and developing, in a global partnership. And these sustainable development goals recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequity, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So this particular presentation is focusing on the sustainable development goals that's on the screen. Number 3, good health and well-being. Number 4, quality education. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. And number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So the refugee landscape is impacting all of these. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Megan Bracy is the Director for Refugee and Migrant Services at Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. In this role, she leads a dynamic team that's responsible for a portfolio of programs that support the initial welcome and long-term integration of refugees and migrants through reception and placement, intensive case management, workforce development, and upskilling, and services for migrants that are seeking asylum at the southwest border and across the country. Prior to joining LIRS, Megan served as the Associate Director for Community Integration at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And before that, worked locally as a resettlement director at the International Institute of New Hampshire. She studied at the School for International Training at the University of New Hampshire, and she has over 15 years of experience serving refugees and immigrants. We'd like to warmly welcome Megan Bracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm really looking forward to this talk, and hopefully, I can meet the objectives set out before us. They're pretty hefty ones and hefty topics, so I hope this will be a shared conversation. So I'm going to just pull up my presentation real quick, and I'm going to put it into presentation mode. Just one second, bear with me. That should do it. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. All right, great. Oops, it just went out, sorry. There we go. All right, well, thank you again. As Yasmina shared, I am Megan Bracy. I'm Director for Resettlement, Refugee and Integration Services, Migrant Services, all of the wonderful things here at LIRS. I've been with LIRS for the past 3 years, and as she mentioned, been in the field almost approaching 20 years now. So just a little bit about who we are. So for those of you who aren't familiar with LIRS, we are the largest faith-based national nonprofit solely dedicated to immigrants and refugees. We're headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. And for the past 80 years, as you can see here on the timeline, LIRS has helped to protect those fleeing persecution, welcoming more than 500,000 refugees into the United States. The organization, LIRS, was founded in 1939, really as a way to assist the resettlement of Lutherans who were persecuted by the Nazi regime. However, that mission quickly grew over time, whether it was supporting Cubans fleeing from Fidel Castro's time during the Cuban refugee airlift, or after the fall of Saigon. We assisted welcoming thousands of Vietnamese refugees. In the 90s, LIRS helped those who were displaced in the Balkans. And then in the 2000s, we supported the lost boys and girls of Sudan, youth who were fleeing violence in their home country and finding refuge here in the US. So over the past decade, we have continued the legacy of compassion by welcoming newly arriving refugees from Syria, from Burma, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Iraq, from Bhutan, Somalia, and the list goes on. But most recently, we've been welcoming refugees from Afghanistan and now from Ukraine. In many ways, our work is intrinsically connected and in line with the sustainability development goals that Yasmina laid out. We believe and we live out in our mission that all people must have access to good health and well-being, quality education, decent work. We spend a lot of time on that, and economic growth. And we advocate tirelessly for peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I'll talk hopefully a little more about that throughout the time we have together. So, as you know, nearly 6 months ago, Afghanistan fell under Taliban control, bringing more than 76,000 Afghans to the United States during the last 6 months. LIRS was intensely involved in a call for evacuation really early on. In April, we were basically screaming from the rooftops and having private conversations with our federal government, encouraging them to evacuate as many people as possible. Over the last decade, we have helped more than 10,000 Afghan special immigrant visa holders, so the SIV, which is a special visa that has been given to those who have supported U.S. forces or U.S. government activities in Afghanistan. We knew at that time, back in April, that there were nearly 90,000 SIV applicants that had yet to be evacuated and moved out. And we knew that with the withdrawal of the U.S. forces, that this would be putting many, many lives in grave danger. And many of them are still in grave danger. We, like the rest of you, watched the fall of Kabul in shock. The horrific images from the airport will remain in our collective memory forever. Fortunately, as you know, the US eventually launched a large-scale evacuation and moved over 76,000 Afghans to safety in the United States. The majority of them were housed in military bases across the country. And since between August and February, the US was able to resettle just about 76,000 of those individuals into communities around the country, Lansing included. So LIRS's resettlement efforts for Afghans have been quite intensive, I would say, over the last 9 months. We have not given up on our allies, and we're still fighting for justice in Afghanistan. But at the same time, we really found ourselves with an incredible, if not daunting, opportunity to welcome these folks into our communities. As soon as the crisis broke, we immediately stood up what we call our Neighbors in Need Fund, Afghan Allies Fund. And, while LIRS supporters have always stepped up in the face of crisis, we could never have expected the type of response that we saw from the American people. Before a formal system was established, we were able, because of that support, to provide temporary housing, essential goods, emergency needs, clothing, medical care, you name it. Because of our locations, we are in 46 cities around the country where we do our resettlement work. And one of those locations is in Northern Virginia. And Northern Virginia is an extremely popular location for Afghans. There's a huge Afghan community there. And so as people were literally landing at Dulles Airport, right in kind of the heart of Northern Virginia, we had Afghans that were simply walking out of the airport and just coming to our offices. They hadn't showered, they hadn't, had any refuge, I guess you could say, since they had fled Kabul and that horrible scene at the airport. So we went right into emergency mode to kind of just give people the essential needs that they really, really needed in that moment. As part of the US response to the Afghan crisis, the State Department established what's called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, APA. So with the federal government's help, we were able to provide a full range of services to this group, even though they didn't arrive as technical refugees, they came under humanitarian parole, which is a status that is intended to be used on a temporary basis for immigrants who are coming into the US. For humanitarian purposes, it's not really intended to be used in a large scale evacuation type of situation. So it's a bit of an unprecedented situation. Since the evacuation began, LIRS has welcomed more than 12,000 of those 76,000 Afghans through our network. at least 25% of those have been served in the DC metro area. So to support them, we added 15 new offices. We opened a temporary, we called it a pop-up shop. I don't know if you can really call it that, but in Northern Virginia to add capacity to support that large group. And that office I am particularly proud of. It's unique in that it's entirely staffed by Afghans. Many of them also newly arrived, and I'm very proud to call them my colleagues. So we also, you can see on the slide, unaccompanied Afghan minors. There were about 250 Afghan children who arrived in the US without their parents. When minors from outside the US come into the US, there is mandate that they go into the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And LIRS is one of the care providers under our Office of Refugee Resettlement. So we cared for those children, a lot of those children in our foster care program, in our temporary sheltered programs. And we do provide mental health services. And we're working really hard now to reunify those kiddos with their parents. Many of their parents either were not able to get out of Afghanistan or are in other places. So some are starting to come now, and we're starting to see those unifications happen, which have been, you know, pretty heartwarming to say the least. So we also have held a number of donation drives. This isn't, you know, this is generally, I guess, a part of refugee resettlement, but again, it was so overwhelming, the number of people who came out, supporters. They brought gift cards, cell phones, SIM cards, you name it. We've been really astounded and heartened by the response of our fellow Americans and neighbors. And even since the crisis began, we've received more than 50,000 volunteer applications through our site, and thousands of in-kind goods and significant financial support from organizations and corporations. This is us. This is our boss, our CEO, Krish, there in the center, cutting the ribbon at our Alexandria office in Northern Virginia. The other thing I would just mention about this effort to bring in this many people in such a short amount of time, it would not have been possible without a partnership that we were able to establish with Airbnb. I don't know if you've seen, but Airbnb has really stepped up their efforts to support refugees around the world. And they did that here in the US. Pretty much, I feel like pretty much every Afghan family I know has stayed in an Airbnb temporarily for the first month or so when they arrived to their community, in part due to the very challenging housing market right now, but also it was just, you know, we would get sometimes a 5-hour notice that a family would be at the airport. So we were just going around the clock, just trying to get people settled. And that really helped us out a lot. So now I'm just going to show a short video that we were able to produce a little bit about our Afghan resettlement. So hopefully this is going to work. Here we go.
When I got here as a refugee, I had many questions and no answers. LIRS helped me on my first day. I remember when I went to the office, which was at Alexandria LCA, and the first question I asked them, is there any way that I can help? I was surprisingly hired, and I was so excited. I have to do my best to, you know, reach the families. And the best part of the job is that I know the culture, the language.
When I was a child, so I was so much into education, into learning, but I never remember a time where I could go to school with that peaceful mind and focusing on my learnings. There was always an incident, missiles hit at school. I thought it's normal. Life is like this for everyone. And that's why I decided to leave Afghanistan, so that I can have a better future for my son. I'm very much excited about this work. It's a platform for me to help and assist my own people.
12 years I was in the military as a combat interpreter. War is horrible, and I've been to war and I lost my friends in war. When you move to a different country, you have a lot of different things in your mind because you're still learning. And that's one of the reasons that I started working with the resettlement agencies, because I've been through that road and I wanted to share my experience with my Afghan brothers and sisters that they move in the horrible situation and from Afghanistan in evacuation. And we show the world as an Americans what we can do to support those in need. And we're still doing it.
Try our best to put them on ease and say we're here for you, that you don't have to worry about anything.
I feel great that I'm showing to the new Afghan arrivals that what America is about.
Right now in the United States, it's all about resettling Afghan refugees. So it's the biggest work. So when you do a big work with a great resettlement agency, that is what makes you feel fulfilled.
Okay. That always chokes me up a little bit. Mushkan, the woman who is speaking, is actually a colleague of ours. She works at LIRS. She actually works at our headquarter office. She herself was a Fulbright scholar, just an incredible woman. And I do want to just take a moment to just talk a little bit about the gender lens that Yasmina brought up, because I think it is essential to this work. You know, when we're resettling refugee families, people are all people. They come with their culture, they come with who they are and what they, you know, what they've grown up with. And then now there's this sort of, you know, they kind of hit the wall of a new culture, like any of us who would go somewhere else and have to navigate what that means here. And I will say, you know, sadly, with this population, there have been a number of incidents of gender-based violence. And, you know, one of the preventative measures that LIRS takes is that we have domestic violence screening protocols in place in every one of our 46 offices around the country to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to protect every one of our clients. We also offer mental health services, and we have mental health services that are culturally appropriate, that are designed and delivered by people from the community that understand the intricacies of the culture and what would be stigmatized and what would be welcomed and how it could be done well. And women's groups that really, you know, in this population give women the opportunity to leave their home and get out a little bit, because that is a factor that really inhibits women from integrating here and having opportunity here that they can have here that they may not have been able to have, particularly back in Afghanistan. Now, at least. And we're also investing in virtual ESL. If COVID has taught us nothing, it's taught us that we can do a lot more virtually than we ever thought we could. And people can learn a new language online. And so we're, you know, equipping our new arrivals with computers and internet access, smartphones and apps so that they can learn English on their own, especially if they have small children, which a lot of our families do. And it's really hard for them to, you know, go to a traditional kind of classroom setting. I would just like to also mention that, you know, we also have very many highly educated women who we've resettled as part of this group, Mushkan being one of them. They worked as high-level employees for the US government overseas, for the embassies, for the Afghan government. And now they're searching for work here in the US. So if you run across any, I recommend hiring them. And also, you know, I think what they're most worried about is the women that have been left behind. And that's their biggest concern and biggest worry, and their families that have been left behind. And lastly, on Afghanistan, I want to just take a second to also talk about the Afghan Adjustment Act. So currently, because almost all of these folks have arrived under humanitarian parole, the only way that they can gain a more permanent status is to apply for asylum in the United States. And there is currently a tremendous backlog of individuals awaiting asylum claims here. It's an arduous process. You generally need an immigration attorney to go through it with you. It's costly. And frankly, these folks don't have the resources and we don't have enough immigration attorneys out there to support them. So legislation has been put forth, the Afghan Adjustment Act, which is similar to other acts that have been in the past, the Cuban Adjustment Act, for example, where Cubans who come here are under parole status are able to adjust after 1 year to a permanent resident and then a US citizen. So our hope and some of our advocacy efforts are around advocating for what we call the AAA, the Afghan Adjustment Act, which will take away a lot of stress from this population and support them to fully be able to embrace their new life here. Okay. All right, so changing scope a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about Ukraine. This has certainly been an intense year. We've really faced back-to-back crises. I mean, there are always crises in the world. And in fact, I was just looking at the most recent statistics from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And, you know, it's so sad to see that we've hit 100 million refugees in the world, or individuals underneath their mandate, and over 25 million of them refugees. It's really, you know, heartbreaking. And I think we can all relate to the heartbreak of seeing what's happened in Ukraine most recently. And just as we are getting to the end of phase 1 of the Afghan resettlement program, the Russian invasion of Ukraine started. We knew immediately that we needed to establish some sort of fund to support Ukrainians, especially as we pretty much immediately started to see them pop up at our local offices as they were able to cross the US southern border across from Mexico. So they were able to, you can get a visa to go to Mexico. You can't get one to come to the US from Ukraine, but they were able to get one to come to Mexico, and then they were able to cross over and gain humanitarian parole. I also want to take this moment to just talk a little bit about the inequity and inequitable treatment of migrants at our border. Ukrainians, you know, they were able to enter pretty easily, fairly easy, while many other migrants, primarily Black and brown migrants, were affected by the different protocols, Trump era protocols put in place that either required them to remain in Mexico or under Title 42, a CDC health protocol would not allow them to come in due to COVID. Both of these, you know, have really blocked thousands and thousands of asylum seekers for months, if not years, from entering the US. Yet we saw the inequity when Ukrainians came, and not to say that they are no, you know, I think everybody knows that, you know, they also are fleeing a horrible situation, but it just really showed some of the racism and inequity that we're seeing at our southern border. And similarly, it mirrors some of the racism in immigration we have seen internationally, such as the UK pledge to send refugees to Rwanda, or in videos of Black migrants being denied entrance to trains in the Ukraine. These are all just, you know, horrible examples about how inequity is just entrenched in all of our systems, and migration and immigration is, of course, no different. In fact, it's, you know, people are even much more vulnerable to it there. However, I will say the US does have a long history of resettling Ukrainian religious minorities here through a program called the Lautenberg Amendment. So while we were scrambling to support Ukrainians who were popping up in Portland, Oregon, and Jacksonville, Florida, and West Springfield, Massachusetts, we were also resettling Ukrainian families through the traditional US refugee admissions program. And the next video I'm going to show you is of a Ukrainian family that was reunited at our West Springfield, Massachusetts office. And I hope the audio is okay. Is the audio okay for the video? Did everyone hear it? Okay, great.
Yes.
There we go.
Было особенно страшно, когда они жили в Ирпене, город такой, что они в подвале сидели с детками. У меня такое, я так переживала, на муж и все. Я ночью лежала и плакала. Кого мы ждем? Самых дорогих. Без слез не могу. Нам благодаря вот сотрудникам Асентрии, вот и Оле, то и любые вопросы мы обращались, никогда не было отказа.
They are regular refugees. They were filed through the Luxembourg program. They got approval back in 2021. All the time on the phone with their mother who invited them here because they had to wait that long for the flights. I see there is email coming, flight is scheduled. There was so much joy. I felt like it's my sisters coming here.
Не верится, что мы уже тут на месте.
Это как вот, когда война началась, первый день, ну, вообще, типа, да, и быть такого не может. Ну, как это война
Даже
началась?
понять, мы думали, это за 3 дня как-то закончится и все. Ну, мы, конечно, первые мечтали, чтобы дети наши больше не столкнулись с войной, потому что вот такие маленькие уже ощутили, что такое война. А тут хотелось бы, чтобы наши дети получили хорошее образование, создали хорошие крепкие семьи и были счастливыми гражданами Америки.
Чтобы они были свободными. Вот.
Great. Yeah, so Accentria Care Alliance is one of our affiliates. So we do work through a model whereby we have partnerships with some, you'll recognize the Lutheran Social Services, but we also partner with agencies. Actually, Accentria used to be a Lutheran Social Services, and they changed their name to more reflect their current mission and who they're serving. They're a wonderful organization in Massachusetts. So Ukraine. So similarly, in some ways, I think we learned a lot from the Afghan crisis, and we knew that people were going to need our support. I think, we were able to support about 250 people that had families. So who knows how many people that had crossed the US southern border, because they really didn't have a sponsor to support them. And through our agencies, we were able to provide, financial assistance primarily. But then the Biden administration made a promise to resettle 100,000 Ukrainians to the United States. And because the refugee admissions program can be quite bureaucratic and arduous to get through, they made a decision to use another humanitarian parole program called Uniting for Ukraine. So this is a program by which a sponsor can sponsor essentially a family from Ukraine to come to the United States. By signing up to be a sponsor, the sponsor is responsible for supporting the family in its entirety of the time that they're here. The parole is for 2 years, and the assumption is that Ukrainians will return after 2 years. While it is my experience that every refugee wants to go home, that's sort of at the base of all things. We don't know what Ukraine is going to look like in 2 years. So I do imagine that, we'll be crossing that bridge once we get there. The program has been quite successful. There have been over 70,000 applications filed with the USCIS, and already in just a short period of time, almost 10,000 people, or excuse me, 12,000 people have arrived here, Ukrainians. At first, the idea was that they would fully be supported by their sponsor. However, legislation that we advocated for was just passed that will allow them to be eligible for all of the same benefits and services that refugees are eligible for. So now we have the daunting task of finding all these people and getting them enrolled in our services so we can help them out. So that's a little bit about what's happening on the ground with Ukraine, at least on the resettlement side. And I just want to talk a little bit about LIRS in general, our model, and kind of how we envision resettlement working. So Afghanistan and Ukraine have demonstrated the need for the US to really reimagine refugee resettlement, to support both a crisis when it happens and also sort of the traditional US refugee admissions program, which, as I mentioned, can be much more bureaucratic and slow. Our public-private vision is built around a single goal: to create an empowered living experience for refugees and immigrants. Our vision is not to implement programs entirely based on how the federal government defines needs, but to center our programs around the needs that are presented by our clients, and really our staff, who are often our former clients. Increasingly, we are relying on the voices of immigrants and refugees rather than the edicts of long-held government programs to inform how we approach immigration and refugee resettlement to advance practice and policy. We are extending our services to truly offer what we call the long welcome at LIRS, a comprehensive resettlement and integration model that allows immigrants not simply to survive, but to thrive here. There is a place, this is a place where the UN goals become particularly important. While good health and quality education are part of the standard of care provided by the Refugee Resettlement Program, empowered living means decent work and economic growth. And many times refugees, pretty much all the time, enter into entry-level jobs, whether that is cleaning hotel rooms or landscaping or, working in a manufacturing plant, which are fine ways to get started. But we want to help people to find work that has a meaning to them, that is a more quality of life, and that allows them to grow economically here, to become homeowners, to have more assets, to truly pass along to their children. So a critical part of this work is implementation of this tripartite model. So a considerable majority of LIRS funding comes from the federal government, supporting the 90-day resettlement mandated by the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and a lot of our other programs that support refugees longer term. As one of the 9 national resettlement agencies, LIRS partners with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who I mentioned earlier, to provide the standardized services available to any refugee who's resettled through our program. So that basically means a home that's stocked with modest furniture, culturally familiar foods, all the basic amenities of an American home, school and ESL enrollment, community orientation, and building connections through volunteers to area services and other opportunities. Employment counseling and job readiness and placement is a key and crucial part to becoming independent here, and then helping them to feel connected to their community. And another major federally funded component of our work is our support for unaccompanied minors, which I talked about a little bit with the Afghans, including foster care and family reunification. Our major support from the federal government, candidly, is not going to change, but our newfound private support is enabling the other 2 component parts of our model: private funding and social enterprise. Private funding from individuals and corporate giving enables programs to be unencumbered by all of the bureaucracy that comes with federal funding. And while we're just beginning to explore our social enterprise arm, we believe that it will eventually be a self-supporting means of of empowerment for the refugee and immigrant community through services that we're developing, like micro lending, so they can start small businesses, and different types of employment services for upskilling and gaining better employment. Here are some examples of our innovative program, all of our privately funded programs that we're investing in to support our clients. I'll quickly just highlight New American Cities there in the corner. This is one of my favorite and I think flagship programs that LIRS has developed. And it really is the purpose of New American Cities is to help refugees and immigrants to gain access to training and land higher quality and better paying jobs. For example, we recently had a client in our Baltimore New American Cities program from Kenya, and she is a strong background marketing professional, and she just really struggled here in the US to kind of get past that first interview. And through our help and coaching and support of our career navigator, she was able to not only land the second interview, but she landed the job. And then when they offered her a sort of more entry-level job, she was able to use her skills she learned with our help to negotiate a higher level position and a $20,000 increase in her salary. So those are the types of successes we really celebrate and reasons we want to keep innovating and thinking of better ways to do our work. And with that, I think I'm going to pause and see if there are questions or pass back to Yasmina.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that wonderful presentation. And we can either take questions in the chat or people can also raise their hands. I have a couple questions right off the bat, if you're ready for those. My first one was when you were talking about the Afghan population and the fact that there were 90,000 special immigrant visa holders that potentially that had not been processed. And there are 76,000 Afghans that came in the last 6 months, but I suppose that all of them were not holding SIVs. So how many SIVs who served the US are still overseas?
So that's a great question. And we understand that there's somewhere between 30 and 40,000 that still remain in Afghanistan that are in some part of their processing for their SIV. The US is continuing to, there are very, maybe one flight a day leaving Afghanistan with individuals who are being processed in Qatar. Some of them are SIVs, some are being processed under refugee status, and actually some small numbers are still coming in under the parole status. So we have quite a mixed bag, but the US is still there. I think our advocacy, I think that they know they're working on it, but we need to continue to push to make sure that the will continues to process everyone who's there. And I will say we have incredibly strong allies within the veterans community who have been just unbelievably wonderful in advocating, for their interpreters, for the people that worked right beside them. They're truly their brothers, their sisters. And so they have been extremely helpful in helping us to kind of plead that case and continue to push the administration. They're our partners, but we also are there. We annoy them too and push them to support that group.
Okay. And then just a question about the Ukrainian situation.
Yeah.
You talked about the sponsor program because they were mainly humanitarian parolees. And then you said that actually the slide that you showed of the limited benefits that humanitarian parolees were receiving had changed and were now going to be the same as refugees. Does that mean that they have a path to citizenship?
No, it does not. It does not. So they would still maintain their humanitarian parole status.
Mm-hmm.
But Ukraine humanitarian parolees who arrived, within this certain time period are eligible for, basic services like employment services, support with case management, accessing a doctor, helping the kids enroll in school, those types of services. Mm-hmm. And they're also eligible for refugee medical assistance for 12 months. So that's essentially health insurance or Medicaid, and refugee cash assistance for 12 months. And that amount varies state to state, and it's generally very low amount of money, but it's a little bit of money to help out.
So do you still need those supporting families with that change
Yeah.
or no?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's still a sponsorship program. So sponsors still sign up and have to, in order for someone to come, that's still the process. And I will say, generally in our approach to resettlement at LIRS, we do what's called a co-sponsorship model, where we work with community groups, churches, mosques, could even be, we've had like a yoga studio, it doesn't matter, just a community group that comes together that wants to co-sponsor a refugee family. And essentially they are, another arm to welcome the family into the community. And so, I think similarly, this sponsorship model, which essentially most of the sponsors have been Ukrainian themselves, they're applying for their family members to come, it will provide some needed support. We saw it firsthand. I mean, especially with the Ukrainians coming across the US southern border. I mean, the types of stories we were hearing from our affiliates, like, 19 people staying in a 2-bedroom apartment, just really tough situations where people were doing their best, but, it's not easy. So I think the agencies can step in and provide some, just a little breathing room and help for those sponsors and for the families that are coming.
We have a question in the chat, and the question was, of course, my screen just changed. When you were speaking of Afghan refugees, you mentioned that you need to, quote, go out and find them. Can you expand on that, please?
That was actually in reference to Ukrainians because of the sponsorship program. So generally in refugee resettlement, the sort of traditional model, we say, yes, we'll take this case. They might be living in a refugee camp in Kenya, for example. And we say, yes, we're going to place you here in Michigan, and this agency is going to support you. And then we get a notification that the case is traveling. Okay, great. And we meet them at the airport. We find an apartment. We set it up. We're good to go. And from day one, they know who's supporting them. With the Ukraine program, it's individual sponsors. So, the majority of the sponsors are immigrants, maybe, but they haven't necessarily connected with a resettlement agency. And so they're sponsoring these Ukrainians privately. So there's really no way for us to know where they are. USCIS, or Department of Homeland Security, has been sharing information with us as to where the sponsors are located on an aggregate, so we know like the majority are in Coney Island, New York. Okay, but we also know that they're popping up here and there, walking into our offices saying, I'm just arrived, I'm from Ukraine, can you help me? But, it's a little different than when a refugee is resettled, and it kind of, we have a system in place to make sure they're very well connected to an agency from day one.
So you don't really process those cases.
We aren't, yeah, they're kind of outside our scope. They're being processed outside our scope. So it makes it a little tricky. But we're trying our best to figure out how to make sure they know that they can access our help.
Wonderful. Are there other questions?
Would it be helpful if I stopped sharing my screen? Maybe then.
Yeah, then we could see all the screens. That would be great.
Sure.
And maybe not highlight myself. That's possible. So I just wanted to also make a link between the funding for some of these resettlement activities and the work of the United Nations. So the United Nations has the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. One of their UN agencies is mandated to aid and protect refugees, people that are forcibly displaced, stateless persons, and to assist in their voluntary repatriation, local integration, and resettlement. We know that the United States has not been paying all of our UN dues, right? So what we have promised is not, we're not always following through with that, and that it inhibits the amount of work that can be done eventually in the field. I also want to mention UNICEF, which is the United Nations, it was formerly called the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. Now it's the UN Children's Fund, which is an agency of the UN that's responsible for providing humanitarian and developmental aid to children worldwide. So I just want to open up the discussion to Dr. Wiley. If you can unmute, sir.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to thank Megan for an excellent presentation. And knowing that organizations like this are always short funded, I think any of us that want to support the work that the Lutherans are doing here, just Google for LIRS, and there is a link there by which one can make a donation directly for this work that Megan and others in the Lutheran Church are doing. I just wanted to mention that in fact, the problem for the UN is that the majority of refugees are taken care of by poor nations. The US is allowing in 125,000 refugees this year. That's the cap on it that we said, which actually amazingly is a 700% increase from what President Trump allowed, 125,000. But what is interesting is that all of the following nations are at least caring for 6 times that many refugees. Turkey has 3.5 million. Pakistan, a poor country, has 1.5 million. Ethiopia, where the average income per day per person is $2 a day, is caring for 733,000 refugees. And we go on with Bangladesh, Lebanon, Iran, Sudan, Uganda, Pakistan, and Colombia. All of these countries are shouldering the load in ways that we are not. So UNHCR, High Commission for Refugees, is trying to help with some of that. And for those of you who received notice of this meeting via from GLUNA, Greater Lansing UN Association, you'll find at the bottom of that notice a way that you can make a donation to the UN High Commission for Refugees, as well as we will be sending you this next week a 5 times match offer from UNICEF, which is now vaccinating 1/3 of the world's children for the basic high childhood diseases, and also which has taken on the responsibility for coordinating all the COVID vaccines for the International COVAX initiative with the World Health Organization. So they are just desperate for funds, as well as we are pushing Debbie Stabenow, our senator, who is chair of the Agriculture Committee in the Senate, to dig up some money from the US Congress for the World Food Program, which funds food for a lot of the refugees through UNICEF, UNHCR, and national programs. So all these organizations are in desperate need at this time where the world is in such a tumultuous crisis of refugees from everywhere, and it is getting worse. And with the climate change, refugees already showing up in the Middle East and North Africa. So I just hope we can keep both LIRS and the UN agencies in mind when we want to do something for refugees.
Thank you, David. There are some more questions and comments in the chat. One is there anything that can be done for Afghans that worked with the US military in terms of getting jobs, benefits, or citizenship within the US?
Yes, definitely. And just want to thank you so much, David, what you shared. That was really great. But yes, the effort is ongoing. So, we quickly kind of resettled Afghans into community, which essentially means they have a place to live. But that, the integration process, if you will, could take a lifetime, right? But essentially, Yes, you know, in Lansing, I believe there are at least one refugee resettlement agency, and I'm happy to help connect if locally you're interested in being connected. You know, refugees need immigration attorneys, so that's for sure. As far as how to, you know, gain status here, that's something we're working on right now. Jobs, absolutely. Many refugees benefit in many programs have, you know, mentorship opportunities, you know, where one could support an Afghan who's looking to find a job. A lot of the Afghans, they worked with Americans. They're very familiar with American culture. They're very, you know, astute to sort of the nuances of American, you know, job expectations and just kind of work ethic and, you know, just the different types of things that can sometimes make it hard when you're new here to acclimate. And generally, you know, like I said, first jobs might be more entry level, but they can always work with somebody to help them to get a better job. And, you know, the agency's job is really to get all of those initial benefits and services in place. But it takes a long time, you know, for a new immigrant or refugee to really understand and learn the system. So I would advocate for volunteering. You can sign up on our website as well. When you go to make that donation, no, just kidding. You can also sign up to volunteer or at least to get more information about how to stay engaged. And I think in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of our advocacy work and what we do there. So I can also talk about that.
Thank you, Megan. So in the chat, the donation link has been posted for LIRS as well as for UNHCR through the UN. So please feel free to go to the chat if you're interested in doing that. We have more comments. The next question or comment is, we provide weapons. The other countries are making friends. We need to reinstate the Berlin airlift concept. Do you know anything about the Berlin airlift, Megan? I don't need.
No, but I'd like to hear more.
So if anyone can, if the commentator would like to unmute and jump in the conversation, you're welcome to. Ms. Wells?
Yes, World War II, the US bombers were dropping food. In fact, my father, who happened to be part of a bomber crew, one of the many books I'm finding that he had collected during his life was called The Candy Bomber. And one particular bomber actually dropped candy over Berlin for the children. Peace Corps, there's all kinds of things the US does tiny bits of to make friends, which they could have done with Afghanistan all over the place, build schools and all this other, but that, I want to make a sign that says, I forget the particular word, but Halliburton's on there someone help me, come on, someone else with white hair can do this too. Reprogram Halliburton in effect. You know, we get factories that do changeovers. Well, we need to do one with Halliburton and have them, they can still make all kinds of government money. We just need to tell them this is how we want you to do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Wells. She also said food, not firearms in the comments.
Oh, yeah.
So we have some other questions and comments. So there was a, Ms. Bracy mentioned that we had at least one refugee resettlement agency in Lansing, and we actually do have two. So we have St. Vincent Catholic Charities. They resettle families and adults over the age of 18. And then we also have Samaritas, which is associated with actually LIRS, but they're more of a local organization. They were Lutheran Social Services. They're now called Samaritas. They've rebranded, and they serve unaccompanied refugee minors and other youth that don't have status that need assistance, many who are crossing the southern border. So there's a question, is LIRS still focusing on resettling unaccompanied minors in Lansing? And I think the answer is yes.
Yes, yeah, I actually just, I literally just texted our director for children and family services to just make sure I had that correct. So yeah, we have a long-term foster care program with Samaritas that unfortunately we are ending, but we do have a transitional foster care program with Bethany Christian Services in Lansing that will continue to operate. So yes.
So your contract with Samaritas is ending and you're picking up with Bethany?
I think we've always been with Bethany as well, but it's just a different program. But yes, essentially.
So I know that Bethany had serviced the Grand Rapids area for a long time, and we're one of the
That's
primary resettlers of unaccompanied minors in Grand Rapids. So it doesn't surprise me that they're moving here as well. Also in the chat, there is a link for volunteering with St. Vincent Catholic Charities Refugee Services in Lansing. So all of the refugee populations that Megan mentioned today, especially the Afghani population, as well as potentially the Ukrainians, could receive some services through St. Vincent. There's a link there for to volunteer. There's a link for Bethany as well that's on the chat, so that individuals who want to work with refugee minors or perhaps take some into your home. It's a wonderful experience. You can do that. Then there is another organization called the Refugee Development Center in Lansing, and they are looking for some English language volunteers for this summer. And so there's a link there if you want to spend some wonderful time volunteering. There's an opportunity there. And I'm sure there are other opportunities at RDC, this Refugee Development Center. They also had a website where families that had needs, the needs would be placed on the website, and other people would adopt that family and buy those items. There's a comment about the Berlin airlift. It said it was the response to the Soviet Union cutting off all access to West Berlin. Berlin was entirely within the Soviet zone of control of Germany, although West Berlin was still to be governed by Great Britain, US, and France. And there's a link for more history on that. That airlift provided essentials, food, and other supplies to over 300,000 flights to West Berlin. A little bit of history. Are there any other comments or questions? Megan, we'd like to thank you profusely for your time and your talent, sharing it with us today.
My pleasure.
And I think you have another slide for us as we talk about advocacy actions.
Yes, let me pull that up. See if I can do this twice. No. Here we go. I'm going to share my whole screen. All right, hopefully you can see that. So every year around this time, around World Refugee Day, and happy to see you're kind of taking this as a World Refugee Week, on June 22nd, which is tomorrow, we are doing a big call your representatives call-in, sort of Zoom fly-in, if you will, to sort of, really share our vision, some of what I explained in my presentation, but also just encourage our representatives to support refugees and to support migrants, and to do everything within their power to make that, happen. So we also, sort of some examples, and you're welcome to join if you, sorry for the short notice, but you can definitely sign up and be a part of this. On our website, we also have a full advocacy, a bunch of different advocacy calls to action. The Afghan Adjustment Act is on there. We'd love your support in that way. And those are relatively simple, already drafted letters. You just sort of, it's a nice system, sets you up and you can send them off. So that's sort of my plug for how you could support in our upcoming advocacy days, but really year round. It doesn't have to just be this time of year that we work to support our newest neighbors. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you all.
There is one more question for you, Megan, that's in the chat. First, I want to tell everyone that the link to the advocacy action is in the chat, so you can copy and paste it so that you can act on it tomorrow. The question in the chat is, this individual is interested in what is being done to address the inequities and advocate for Black immigrants.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I do think, you know, part of our work is, one, to call out inequity when we see it, call out racism when we see it, as advocates at a national level for immigrants and refugees. It's like so blaringly clear when these things happen. I will give one example of, you know, so some of our advocacy is, you know, yelling from the rooftops so everyone can hear us, but some of it is very strategic within the administration, because we understand that a lot of the inequity comes from systemic issues within our, you know, government, really, that we need to call out. And while there might be people with maybe, you know, good intention, they're not aware of the way that the system is creating further inequity. So one example, and this is very, very bureaucratic in some ways, but makes a big difference in people's lives, is the time it takes for our U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services Department to issue work authorizations. So in order to work in this country, you have to have work authorization if you're an immigrant. And when refugees come, they get it instantly, no matter where they're from, doesn't matter. They get it pretty much, you touch US soil, you can work. With parolees, they have to go through an application process. So when the Afghans first started coming, you know, if they did not go to the bases, then we had to figure out how to apply for their work authorization, and it was not expedited. So it could take up to, for someone who just applies on their own, it can take almost 9 months until they're able to work. Now, mind you, they get no assistance. And so, you know, what is someone supposed to do? You know, it's just not a tenable situation. And it also just leads to more people working under the table in places where they could be taken advantage of. So, my point of this is that with Ukrainians, when they started to come, this is a way, I think, in which we've sort of used the inequity to benefit the rest of everybody. And so we pushed for Ukrainians to have expedited employment authorization cards. But we said we don't want it unless you make sure everyone within that paroled category, meaning Cubans, Haitians, particularly, even Afghans, you know, other populations, but majority, I think, you know, of people we're seeing paroled in outside of Ukrainians and Afghans are Black and brown immigrants. And they're the ones waiting a year to get work authorization. And so we've just learned that in July, they will implement a process where everyone within that category, and, you know, I'm telling you, it's very detailed, but everyone within that category of parole, humanitarian parole, will automatically have expedited employment authorization. So it's a win from our point of view, because, you know, when we try to serve some of these clients, if they're not going to be work authorized for a year, it's like they don't even, why they can't even enroll in our programs, because our goal is to get people jobs within 6 months or so. So I think that's a small win in terms of equity. I think the other ways in which, you know, we are addressing it is by certainly calling it out. And I'm proud to work for an immigrant woman leading LIRS, who's out there on CNN and MSNBC and is sharing, you know, what's going on in the world and ways in which we can be better and do better by the people that we serve. But it's still a major issue. And I think, you know, even, of course, once people are resettled in the US, they still face, you know, racism here. Of course, you know, it's a part of the systems of this country. And so, you know, while we work to advocate for people around the world, we also work to advocate right here at home for the people that we're serving, to make sure that, you know, the landlord doesn't discriminate against this person living in their building, but not that person. And those are the types of issues we face every single day in this work. So it's blaringly clear, and certainly the last administration did not help with that. But if anything, it made it more apparent, right? It made it more on the table. And so now it's not an issue that people can easily ignore.
Mhm.
So I hope that helps a little bit to share some of what we're doing.
So another related kind of follow-up question that came to me in a direct message is LIRS attending to the dire needs of Haitian immigrants in the US South and Mexico?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we were all just, heartbroken and appalled to pay witness to what happened at the US southern border and our own Custom and Border Patrol officers and what they did. We do serve Haitians, definitely, but I will say just it's more on a policy issue of how many Haitians gain status versus how many Cubans is a good example, and not to compare the two or to put two, you never want to put, two groups of people against one another, but both Cuban and Haitians are eligible to enter the United States under Cuban Haitian entrance status. But we often don't see very many Haitians being able to actually gain entrance. And so it's an ongoing issue. I think our advocacy is more around US policy towards Haitian migrants versus, in essence, then addressing those who were pushed back from the border. We're working hard to overturn Title 42, which is a discriminatory policy that's been, hidden within a health policy. Same with the MPP, or the Remain in Mexico policy, which requires immigrants to stay in Mexico while they await their asylum hearing, which is, could be years. So it's just, these are across the board anti-immigrant policies that are still in place. And a lot of it is politics, frankly, candidly, that I think the administration is weighing its odds as to how much it can do. But yes, absolutely. I think it's definitely one of our top priorities in terms of our advocacy efforts to push for more equity in who is admitted to the US and how they're treated.
Thank you so much. We are closing on our window of opportunity to ask any more questions. I don't see any hands up and no more in the chat. Thanks for the work that you do, Megan. I'm sure this is a very busy week for you. Thanks for being with us tonight. I couldn't have said it better. So Megan, we'll follow up with you. Let's give you a round of applause. That was fantastic. Everybody's on mute. All applaud for them. And you're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. We're going to move on to the World Refugee Week events overview. So this event was part of a week-long series of events that is being held by the World Refugee Awareness Week Coalition, which is just a group of concerned and engaged organizations that are helping to promote the safe and full support of arrivals that arrive here in the Lansing area. We have a full list of the programs of events that are happening at stvcc.org. This morning, I attended a graduation at the Global Institute of Lansing, where we had 8 refugees adults who graduated. And so that was very exciting. They have graduated over about 94 individuals in the last 12 years. So that's quite exciting. There are more events every day this week, and if the link is in the chat as well, so that you can see what else is happening tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, and have some fun. Our last slide and issue is to talk about membership, and I'm going to turn it over to our dear President, Bob Barnhart, and he's going to close this out.
Great. Thank you so much, Yasmina, and thank you for hosting this program. And Megan, that was terrific. Just a wonderful program, and really helped me understand the work that you were doing. And I thank you for that work, and I thank LIRS for the good work that they're doing. This is a good example of the types of programs that we bring you on a regular basis through GLUNA, and I hope that you'll consider being a member if you're not already. By joining GLUNA, you make a statement to the rest of the world that you are supportive of the work of the United Nations and of programs like this, where we learn about what is happening in the world and ways that we can be of service in helping others. So hopefully you'll consider that. Just go to gluna.org. You'll find a button there that says join us. Click on that button and you can become a member. So we hope that you'll do that and consider that. I think we're a great organization. We hope to bring you many more good programs like this, and we could really use your support as membership, if you're not already a member, to continue what we are doing. So thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for those of you who are members for being part of GLUNA, and we look forward to you joining us in future programs. Have a great evening and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.